Eyes are here. Got a joystick. Right, and you just put the helmet on like that. Right.
Eyes tell you you're moving, but your body doesn't.
Hey, Saber, you there?
Virtual reality has been on the verge of mainstream for a pretty long time now. I mean, when you think about it, the concept of virtual reality has been deeply ingrained in media with things like VR Troopers back in 1992, and more famously with The Matrix back in 1999, and then its less successful sequel, Sword Art Online, which is somehow still running, but that's not the point. The idea of creating an entire world that we can jack into, jack out of, and for the R18 jack off in has always just been enticing. Blurring the line of what's real and what's realist. If you told me as a 6-month-old baby that one day I'd be able to put on a headset and then slay dragons with my bare hands, I would have probably looked at you and then shit my pants because I'd be a baby. But finally experiencing it firsthand, I can say that virtual reality is leaps and bounds ahead of anything that I thought was possible. When you first hear about it, sure, it seems easy to grasp. A pair of heavy goggles that you put on your face that lets you play video games with your body. But you don't really understand the gravity of it all until you go out of your way and truly experience it. I mean, sure, Resident Evil 4 is scary when the Chainsaw Man is sprinting at you, but trust me, Resident Evil 4 is way more scary when the Chainsaw Man is sprinting at you. The amount of immersion that can only be experienced in VR is insane. Hearing creaks from behind you in a haunted mansion, literally having to dodge bullets in a bullet hell, or just having a heart-to-heart conversation with someone dressed as Kermit the Frog.
Oh, hey. I was kidding, holy
VR feels like a peek into the future. Virtual reality has the potential to be the next big leap in gaming. It just hasn't been able to make that step yet. I completely understand why people are skeptical of the concept. Even now, thinking about a kid strapping a TV to his face and swinging his arms around make my internal boomer have a brain aneurysm. But I do genuinely believe that VR can have a massive imprint on the future if we can just give it the chance that it deserves. Because it's awesome and really cool, and today we're gonna talk about this. That's the name of the show. Believe it or not, VR headsets have been around for longer than any of us have been alive. Sure, nowadays you can buy a Quest 2 for lower than a non-scalped PS5, but the road to get here was long and very disappointing. The first real head-mounted display, or HMD, was created by Ivan Sutherland and his students back in 1968. However, the HMD was so heavy that it had to be suspended from the ceiling, unless you wanted to go from a 3D experience to a 2D existence, because it would crush you. Obviously, this wasn't necessarily ready for mass production, but it is the first noted HMD display ever, and they did call it the Sword of Damocles, which is awesome, so I wanted to mention it before we move forward. Good stuff out there, man. It wasn't until the early 90s that things started to become real, virtually real.
Enter the world of the game.
An article in Computer Gaming World magazine predicted affordable VR by 1994, which in this industry is something we call wrong. I mean, sure, companies like Atari and Sega were trying to punch first in the battle for VR dominance, but Atari's research lab for VR technology would quickly fail, and the much-hyped Sega VR never saw the light of day, putting video game giants at a shocking 0 for 2, which is the exact same score I would have if I got in the ring with Mike Tyson twice. But then a company named Virtuality released the first ever mass-produced multiplayer VR entertainment system. That's a mouthful. And remember that article I just mentioned a couple of seconds ago about affordable VR by 1994? Well, the Virtuality system cost up to $73,000. If we account for inflation, it would look like this. I can't see you. Did you laugh? Now, unless your last name was Gates, this was the exact opposite of a household product. Just when things were starting to look dark, a company decided to take up the challenge that nobody else would. A little company by the name of Nintendo. Maybe you've heard of it. As mouthwatering and exciting as this may sound, anyone who's been a fan of Nintendo for longer than 15 minutes knows that that company is very hit and miss. Sometimes Mario is saving the princess in the most graphically impressive banger of the year, and other times he's breakdancing with the gusto of a New York street performer trying to get a 40-ounce of beer for dinner. I don't know if that's canon. Nintendo dipping their toes in VR was a grand and total miss. The Nintendo Virtual Boy, or as it should have been called, the hunky-dunky poo-poo piece of garbage, featured no head tracking at all. And instead of being a head-mounted display like they were doing back in 1968, it became a stationary, heavy piece of metal that didn't even have color. Hey Nintendo, the 1920s called. They want their monochrome colors back. Hello? Oh, I didn't know you were still here. No, I can't say that. Those words are banned. Any advice? For you? Oh, you should invest everything into stocks right now. Okay, bye. That guy's gonna get so owned. I'm sure this may not come as a surprise to you, but to put it lightly, the Nintendo Virtual Boy did not succeed. To put it less lightly, this console to this day, holding the wonderful trophy of Nintendo's largest commercial failure. Yes, it did worse than the Wii U. 13 times worse. For a long while after, VR kinda sat in this weird corner of the toy box where it kinda looked like a fun idea for devs to mess around with, but it just wasn't as enticing as this one, or maybe this one, or maybe even that one. If companies like Atari couldn't do it, Sega couldn't do it, and even giants like Nintendo couldn't do it, then who could? The future of VR started to look a little grim. But then, 16 years after that last massive commercial VR failure, a man by the name of Palmer Freeman Luckey spent his free time in his garage designing and building VR headsets. Now, keep in mind that Luckey wasn't funded by any kind of mega corporation. He was funding his project by fixing broken iPhones and a bunch of other odd jobs, which is nuts. It took until 2012 for Luckey to launch his 6th generation unit of the Oculus Rift. Yes, that Oculus. Notable game dev John Carmack, who worked on games like Doom and Quake, asked for a prototype headset and Luckey lent it to him free of charge. Then in E3 of 2012, John Carmack used the headset to show off Doom 3 BFG edition on the device, which made this project go mega viral. Luckey showed off the headset to Valve, and Gabe Newell himself said it was exciting and asked people to support it on Kickstarter. The project then raised $2.4 million on Kickstarter, which is 10 times more than they asked, and thus, VR was put on the map. Other companies made their own headsets, like the Valve Index, the PSVR, that weird cardboard thing that Nintendo did. Come on, Nintendo, who was that for? Luckey even took inspiration from Sword Art Online and devised a headset that had 3 explosive charges in it, so if you die in the game, it blows your head up in real life. That's not a joke. This actually happened. I don't know how you're gonna get that past the CPSC, but you can't say he didn't try. Luckey eventually sold the Oculus to Facebook, which rebranded to Meta, and finally we've reached today. A point in time where at the same price as a non-scalped PS5, you could buy a device that will change your mind on what's possible in video games. Putting a VR headset on for the first time simultaneously made me feel like a 2-month-old diaper-wearing baby and a 90-year-old diaper-wearing man. I had the wonderment of playing video games for the first time, learning how to navigate an unfamiliar world in a way I never have before, just like the first time that baby Scooch sucked on a SNES controller. Except this time, the main selling point wasn't control. It was immersion. Everywhere I looked was the game. Sounds coming from every direction. You hear the chirpy chirp of birds, you look behind you, and guess what you see? Birds. Duh. When I first turned on my Valve Index, I literally sat in the overworld for a while because I was so awestruck. And though this definitely made me feel like a baby walking for the first time, it all started to make sense so much faster than I thought it would. It was fun slicing blocks to the beat of my favorite music, exploring virtual worlds with my friends. Do you see how my glasses move when I talk? Or just blasting the clothes off some anime girls with a water gun. What are you gonna do? You gonna judge me? Though a lot of the games in the current VR library are so bad that I wish the devs just mugged me instead, the good games refine the concept of virtual reality so well that you'll constantly find yourself playing them in order to improve. Let's talk about Beat Saber. When I first laid my eyes on this game, I went, holy sh**, you're supposed to hit all of those blocks, and the direction that you hit them in matters? What the hell, guys? I'm supposed to be a gamer, not a freaking Jedi. But then when I finally got the game and played it for myself, it felt really good. Even playing on easy mode and chopping one block every 4 hours was satisfying. But the real beauty in this game came with the improvement. Learning how to move your stupid arms correctly so that you don't turn into a human pretzel while trying to perform combos. After clocking 36 hours, I am still nowhere near close to playing some of the songs that some psychopaths use to warm up. I mean, what the fuck? And just for the record, VR is exhausting. Whenever I play VR for longer than 30 minutes, I always just end up drenched in sweat. But hey, anything to master those Jedi arts, huh? I'm pretty sure that if I only worked out using VR and fitness games for 30 days, I'd actually be able to make some decent Wait, that could be a YouTube video. It does feel really good going from this to this. And knowing that in real life, all it means is that you're just less stupid when you move your body. Getting better at VR games oftentimes feels more like a skill than a game in itself. When you get good at a lot of shooting games, it's normally just tied to being able to click on heads faster. But in VR, you have to literally point and aim your weapon and then shoot at someone with enough precision to hit them while they're moving. And you also have to be smart enough to move your body so that you don't get shot. Let's talk about Super Hot.
Super Hot. Super Hot
is a wonderful VR title where time only moves when you move. You spawn into random scenarios where you're forced to be a badass and assassinate everyone before they assassinate you. You can use dick punching, you can stab people, but in most cases, shoot is shoot. And though I was pretty bad at it at first, I had so much fun that I beat this entire game in 1 2-hour sitting. 2 hours may not sound like a lot, but it's 2 hours of crouching, dodging, moving, punching, standing, and doing a bunch of things that my gamer body is not meant to do.
And a new penis. Okay, good.
After getting through the main story and dying a bunch of times, I won, but I realized it was kind of by being a coward. I was so focused on not getting shot that I would awkwardly hide behind things and use an entire clip to hopefully kill one dude with a lucky bullet. And though this was enough to get me through my first playthrough, I didn't get to experience the beauty of the game until I went back and tried again. This time, I had a death wish. I didn't care if I lived or died. I started experimenting with this game's physics and I realized that you could block bullets out of the air with your gun or random objects. I started to throw things a lot more accurately, and I became so confident in my aim that I started shooting people that I wasn't even looking at, making my experience of the game so much different. Sections that once took me 20 minutes to complete, I was now completing in 15 in-game seconds. Yeah, and this level of active skill expression is something that is so unique to VR titles. Now, keep in mind, I really enjoyed Beat Saber, but at the end of the day, it was just a rhythm game. Super Hot was also a fantastic experience, but besides the time-bending mechanic, it was just a wave shooter where you stand in the same spot. Both of these games were really good, but lacking in one aspect that is very important in most traditional games. I'm talking about movement. Yeah. Pretty badass, right? Now, movement is a very difficult puzzle to solve on VR titles. In fact, this is such a tough puzzle to solve that I'd say about 40% of the titles that I have personally played don't have movement at all. When done correctly, it directly contributes to the depth of the game while making you feel more connected with the world that you're exploring. When done incorrectly, it would make 1 hour of playtime feel like riding Riddler's Revenge at 3x speed after having a plate of gas gas station sushi. I've had the stomach flu before, and even that didn't make my tummy as rumbly as bad VR movement. Something about the world rapidly approaching you while you're kinda just standing there feels odd, and it's taken me a lot to get used to it. However, when devs actually try to experiment with movement, it becomes pretty obvious that even in VR, you can make for some amazing action platforming. Let's talk about Stride. Stride is the only movement-centric VR title I've ever played. When facing creative movement, a very tough mechanic that made most devs shake in their boots, Stride went, yeah, I could do that. And thus, it's a game that I can only define as a parkour shooter. You can run on walls, you can slide, you can grappling hook, and you somehow have to do all of this while dealing with dudes whose only goal is to shoot your ass off. The gameplay is either an endless runner or just a set of challenges that get increasingly difficult, a lot of which I haven't beaten. Though this game may seem like it'd be insanely nauseating, the controls are so seamless that once you get the hang of it, it feels natural. You have to swing your arms to run, just like in real life. You have to throw both of your arms forward to jump, just like in real life. You even have to climb up ledges by grabbing and pulling yourself up, just like in real life. I know this kind of sounds a little difficult in theory, but after doing the 5-minute tutorial, I was able to pull off sick tricks like running off the wall and shooting some unsuspecting loser. It's a breath of fresh air to know that good VR games aren't limited to standing in the same spot. All three of these games are great in their own right, but they did rely on a single gimmick all the way through. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you compare it to traditional games, one could say that they were lacking in polish or depth. And so I started to wonder if this was just the VR experience. Was VR gaming doomed to be shallower because the technology was still rocking its baby Jordans? But then a game called Until You Fall spawned out of nowhere and I don't know why I wrote this, and blew my back out. Until You Fall was the first VR title I ever played that felt complete. There's movement, different enemy types, mini bosses, special moves, and it's a roguelike.
But Scooch, aren't you being a little biased?
Yeah, you could tell me that the DMV is a roguelike and I would head over there right now. It may seem like I'm giving a little too much praise for a VR title doing what normal games were doing in 2001, but in VR, getting a new weapon just feels deeper. You have to stance up differently and hold this bad boy in 2 separate spots while exaggerating your swing to do bonus shield damage. This enemy you can one-shot. This enemy takes a little bit of time and he does combos when he attacks you. And this big fuck right here makes you move your entire body out of the way. What the fuck did I do to you, man? The movement feels great. There's a dashing ability that lets you reposition and break shields. You have to swing your weapons in different ways to do combos. Each weapon has its own weight and playstyle, which means a lot when you're choosing which ones you want to dual wield. And basically, this game just shows everything a VR title can be if made by the right hands. But spoiler alert, that is normally not the case. And here's where I must emphasize that VR feels like the second coming of gaming. Though this sounds like it can be a good thing, in most cases I just mean that it's very unrefined. Or dog shit. Do you remember when Nintendo GameCube was the hottest thing and you would play games like Super Mario Sunshine or Super Smash Bros. Melee and every single pleasure center in your brain would light up like the 4th of July because you knew that this is where gaming was headed? But then you go to a Blockbuster with your dad and you rent the Charlie's Angels video game and you realize that video games can also suck dick harder than a Dyson? Well, I experienced that in VR a lot. Games that looked pretty good in their 1-minute trailer but then quickly fell apart the second I paid the $20 and loaded them. They were either buggy, stale and repetitive, or so dead that whenever I tried to play multiplayer with my friends, we would run into server issues or just not be able to load a full match. And this is unfortunately half the roster of VR titles. I know that bad games exist on every console and platform, but in VR, I spent $25 on a dungeon crawler where the first boss just didn't spawn. He just wasn't there. But you want to know the punchline? The game game soft-locked me and kept me running in circles for just long enough to pass 2 hours of playtime, meaning I couldn't refund it. Well played, you son of a bitch. I'm normally a massive advocate for not taking video game reviews too seriously because I think that everyone should form their own opinion. So it pains me to say this, but when you're buying a VR game, please look at the reviews. The highs are some of the greatest gaming experiences I've ever had in my life, but the lows are so damn bad that you're gonna spend more time wondering how they sold this to you in the first place.
Thanks, man.
Now here's the part where I have to zoom out
a bit and talk about another big problem when it comes to VR titles. And that's
the lack of uniformity. When you play a shooting game on the console, chances are your left thumbstick is going to make you move, and your right thumbstick is going to be how you aim, and your shoulder buttons are how you're going to shoot, etc. The reason why this is the recurring control scheme in nearly every shooting game you've ever played is because it just works. And it has been slowly refined over the course of 20 plus years. But VR titles haven't had that luxury, and it shows. In some VR games, you use the left thumbstick to move. In other games, you teleport. In some games, you have to swing your arms, while in other games, you have to literally grab in 3D space and drag yourself around. You would think that this would normally lead to more creative approaches in VR titles, but it is definitely a bigger detriment than anything else. You know, it's bad when the first thing I say in any VR game is, okay, how the f do I what? But you can't really blame devs for not wanting to invest time in making polished VR titles when even right now, at its all-time high, all VR users are less than 1/9 of the Nintendo Switch. The market just isn't big enough to bring over AAA devs that could sit there and invest a bunch of time and resources to make a polished VR experience. Though games like Half-Life Alyx have shown that they could be remarkably successful, why invest time in creating a VR title when you have a much bigger chance of making a masterpiece elsewhere, leaving VR in this weird space where it's just not big enough to garner the same amount of attention as other platforms. But still, even with its glaring faults, awkward control schemes, and somewhat lackluster library, VR has managed to create some of the greatest communities I've ever seen. Now, I want to talk about the most important VR title ever made. And get this, it's free. A game that has kept VR in the picture for a very long time. I don't even know if I could call it a game. Let's talk about VRChat. Now, when you first hear the words VRChat, you probably think of or even
Leave me alone! Leave me alone!
And honestly, that is fair. To explain VRChat in one sentence is the ability to do anything, anywhere, as anyone. Now, this isn't necessarily a new concept. I mean, MMOs have been putting the cat girl in Catfish since the 90s, but VRChat takes the concept of social platform and sprints it to the end goal dressed as a sexual deviant. I can't even begin to scratch the surface of this game, but it is by far the deepest thing I've ever played in my life. Let me explain why. For starters, you can create your own avatar.
But Scoochie Boy, can't you also do that in Elder Scrolls and WWF No Mercy?
Allow me to repeat myself. You can create your own avatar, as in you can literally go into Blender and make what you want. There's nearly infinite worlds which range from hanging out at an aquarium or just finding out which one of your friends is a serial killer, which is my favorite real-life activity. There's areas in which you could watch movies, locations made for drinking games and socializing, psychedelic and trippy spots to lose yourself in, and all of this is made possible by the inclusion of user-generated content. If you can use Blender or Unity, you could create stuff for this game, really putting the power of the player in the hands of the player. Or the ass, depending on where you visit. Hell, the game is so deep that they even invented their own sign language that you could use with normal controllers so that you can communicate with the deaf. There's people with full body tracking so that they can dance and move around. There's an in-game camera that you could use to record video, take pictures, or stream things. You could have it tracked to your body and smooth, or just place it in the 3D world itself. When I first found this out, I literally spent like an hour just messing with it. There's even an entire community of streamers that just use that in-game camera and stream hanging out in random worlds. I don't know if you've ever heard of Fillion, but she's hilarious.
Changed their name to un nuevo nombre.
Meta.
Meto mis huevos en tu boca.
Though this isn't the first game to be this open and user-friendly, it is the biggest game to nail it in VR, which is an experience that I can't even put to words. I have a lot of friends that I just cannot see in my real life, sometimes due to them being in a far city, state, or even time zone. But VRChat has allowed me to reconnect with those friends and be in the same room, even though we're not really in the same room. Playing drinking games on a Friday night, watching a movie together, or just listening to music. And obviously it's all enhanced because we could do it in a train ride through shooting stars, or an aquarium, or this Donkey Kong barrel that says very hard on the top.
How cool is that? I'm in Donkey Kong Barrel.
I originally bought VR as a gimmick. I thought maybe I'd play it for a few days and eventually it would just become a very expensive display item. But now, years after I bought my original Valve Index, I still find myself getting very excited when a new VR title is released. I still play Beat Saber to get some cardio in. I play Super Hot to beat my speedrun times, and I hang out with my faraway friends in weird worlds while getting pretty drunk. I'm a very firm believer that with enough time, polish, and community, VR can have a massive future. We just have to give it the time of day.
Holy shit. Do I land this? Ooh. I gotta grab this gun. Oh god, shit.
I'm Scooch, and I hope you enjoyed whatever this was. Now, I have a bit of a confession. I actually only played fitness games for 30 days just to see how effective it would be as a workout, and I turned that into a YouTube video, which you should see popping up on the screen right here. If it's not on the screen, gotcha. Psych, tricked you again. It'll probably take like a day or two if it's not on there yet. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do because it helps the channel out, and ring the bell so that you don't miss bangers like this one or that one. I hope it's there. If it's not there, then here's a picture of me dressed up as a bald zombie. Weird, right? Anyways, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for watching. I love you. Have a wonderful day.